quite a few challenges with the current remote learning situation, and we are going to focus a little bit tonight on the specific challenges and actually some advantages of remote learning. And we are also going to discuss how you as parents, the main focus of this is how you as parents can help support these skills with your students. One of the major challenges having to do with remote learning is a lack of well-developed executive function skills. And this is what we hope to do tonight, is share with you some ways that you might be able to help your children at home to be able to work on developing this type of function. So what we're going to talk about tonight is broken into two pieces. If you'll give me my next slide, Carol. We're going to talk about first, what is executive function, what falls under, what types of skills fall under those that umbrella, and a little bit of a breakdown as to why those skills are important to begin with. And then we're going to transition into some activities and strategies for skill building. And we're going to share a variety of strategies. And also, this presentation is already linked on the portal on the APS page, but it is available to you all as a PDF. The sources that we used in compiling this and quite a few additional sources are linked in that presentation if you'd like to do further reading or if you were looking for some additional skills. So, and again, there's our team names, and Jill is going to, she has already posted this link, so you'll have our names. You can look us up that way, and also just email that special ed department if you have questions for us after the fact. Please feel free to post comments in our chat box or questions, and we'll get to them here. We'll take some breaks and get to questions as they pop up, okay? So in our executive function overview, we're going to talk about what executive function is, the specific skills that fall under that list, executive function issues that are more specific to gifted education learners, and remote learning challenges. So we'll get started with what is executive function. A lot of this information comes from the Harvard University Center on the Developing Child. Excellent resources available here for you. And again, these links are all available in our presentation that you can access. But executive function and self-regulation skills are essentially just the mental processes that enable us to plan, focus our attention, remember instructions, juggle multiple tasks successfully. So a good analogy here, just as an air traffic control system at a busy airport safely manages the arrivals and departures of many aircrafts on multiple runways, the brain needs this skill set to filter distractions, prioritize skills, set and achieve goals, and control impulses. So that's the umbrella piece. And if we take a look at our next slide, you'll see that executive function skills are mainly related to three different types of brain function. So when we talk about these skill sets, we're looking at working memory, which is the part of our brain function that allows us to retain and manipulate information over short periods of time. Mental flexibility, you'll see this often interchangeably used with cognitive flexibility as well. This helps us to sustain or shift our attention in response to different demands and apply different sets of rules. We'll talk a little bit about the way that kind of attaches to things like growth mindset and being able to shift what we're doing. The idea also of self-control, which lets us, both, as I said, as students and as adults, right? It helps us with things like making sure that we can set and focus on our priorities. And this little graphic shows some more specific skill sets in part of this. And I think you'll see that these are anybody who has worked with children, who has children, who has spent more than 15 minutes with children will see where a lot of these things could play into both academic and personal success. Things like impulse control, being able to keep track of the things we're looking at. And in particular, in a remote environment, something like task initiation is extremely important. How do we convince ourselves to get started on doing the things we need to do? And if you take a look at our next slide, we can look at what the benefits are of having good executive function skills, here abbreviated as EF. So some of the positive things that having good executive function skills can provide for us: better school achievement. If you're able to remember and follow your instructions, if you're able to avoid distractions, adjust when the rules change, if you're able to persevere when things are challenging and manage your long-term assignments, that's going to really benefit your ability to achieve in school. We also see positive behaviors overall. We see better teamwork, leadership, decision-making, working towards goals, your critical thinking, adaptability, being aware of your own emotions and those of others. Those help to build those relationships. Good health. People who have better executive functioning skills make better choices for themselves in terms of health, diet, exercise. They avoid some of the risky activities that can get you in trouble, both physically and emotionally, and they have better coping skills and responses to stress. In addition, beyond being having better achievement in school, better executive function is something that employers are consistently saying that it's something that they feel like potential employees are lacking. This skill set is extremely important for success in work, and you can see why, right? The idea that you would be better organized, that you can plan and problem solve, that you can adjust to changing circumstances, and that you are prepared to be flexible in the face of challenges. Those are really important pieces. So this is a lot of why this is important. The ways we see that some students are struggling with executive function skills are on our next slide. Here are some of the hallmarks of struggle when it comes to executive function skills. Difficulty starting or completing tasks, forgets information they've been told or have read, having trouble switching between tasks and following directions, becoming overly emotional, fixating easily, inability to manage time, disorganized, messy desks, backpacks, having trouble planning or keeping track of assignments, panicking when rules or routines change. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Has anybody seen any of those behaviors with students? I just saw a comment pop up that says it sounds like ADHD and ADD, and there actually is a strong correlation with a need to really practice and build executive function skills with ADD and ADHD. And you see actually quite a bit of research focused around that, and that we see that a lot of those things are beneficial to a lot of people. But if you were to do a Google search or you were to look through a scholarly database, there is a ton of literature that has to do with these pieces. But struggling with certain areas of executive function skills does not equate with having ADD or ADHD. They can, these areas, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, these areas can exist for all people, all ages, whether or not there is an additional diagnosis. This information you'll see here too. Again, I want to remind you that all these links will be available to you. This information actually came from the NAGC, which is the National Association of Gifted Children, and it's a specific section for executive functioning. There's also a lot of research having to do with gifted students and executive function. I just saw, this is my child. This is so many people's children, and I have to admit, some days it's me, myself, right? We all have our struggles here. So let's look at our next slide here. Let's talk about something more specific again from the NAGC. People tend to associate something of the nature of, well, he's so smart, she's so smart. How does he forget to turn in his work? Why can't he remember what happened in class from 30 minutes ago, right? And there is a real misconception that very smart people don't struggle with these types of things, and it just isn't true. And in fact, some of that actually comes from asynchronous development. So it comes from the fact that sometimes students have developed in such a way that their capacity to access new information greatly exceeds their access to organize that information and do something with it once they get it, right? So some of that actually has a lot to do with their giftedness. And also, we're going to talk a little bit more about this, but something we see, I taught before I came into this job, I taught middle school for a long time. And one of the major things we saw with students, and you see it as they, in particular, as they get older, adolescents, into high school, and especially into college, students for whom things have always come easily often have an underdeveloped sense of what it takes to have appropriate study skills. They have a lack of understanding of project planning. They don't know how to ask for help because they haven't really needed to do so. So that's something we definitely see. And you'll also see here, it says they may also have another diagnosis such as ADHD, but it really is common for high functioning, high ability learners to struggle with executive function, okay? So some of the things, and this goes in hand with that last slide, but some of the things we see that might be the cause of some of those underdeveloped skills. If they already understand things in class, if they're able to understand and process that new information really quickly, then they don't have to go home and revisit that material and study it. And therefore, they're not really developing the study skills of a student who might have struggled a little bit more in class. If they are able to just remember what they were supposed to do to begin with, then they don't have a great strategy for writing things down and keeping a calendar or keeping an organizer, because they're used to being able to just glance at it and remember what they need to do. If they understand that material, they don't have a strategy for note taking. If they complete their homework really quickly, then when they have some of those longer term projects, they may very well underestimate how much time is this going to take? How do I chunk a project into manageable steps? If they haven't struggled in school, and I just mentioned this, if they haven't struggled in school, students for whom things have always come easily, not only do they not know how to overcome obstacles, there are real emotional factors at play when they struggle. They can often have a really hard time processing their own struggle, and then they're not sure what to do next. And again, they haven't really had a need to outline or plan their larger projects because they've just been able to get it done. And then when they face those larger challenges, that's when we start to struggle. Okay. Another issue that we see with our gifted learners is perfectionism. And perfectionism comes in two forms. It sounds like wanting to do things perfectly might be a good trait, and there are healthy pieces of perfectionism, but we want to look at how unhealthy perfectionism can be a hindrance. So it can be associated with stress, unyielding expectations, risk avoidance, procrastination. Anybody see procrastination in their kiddos? It can ultimately lead to some bigger issues, some depression, anxiety, even things like violence and substance abuse and eating disorders. So the idea of holding yourself to too high of a standard or an unrealistically high standard can have some great impacts, not just for education, but personally. And it's really, really important, if you see that your child might be reaching that point, that you are seeking appropriate help from mental health professionals. Healthy perfectionism, on the other hand, is associated with achievement and dedication to performance. If you have a student who has a healthy level of perfectionism, they're likely to hold high expectations for themselves, but not have them be completely unattainable. And they have a different motivation and self-confidence to reach their goals. So what we want to do, if you think you have a child who is exhibiting unhealthy perfectionism, is to really do everything we can to help them take the good things about perfectionism and shed some of the negative pieces. And we are going to talk more specifically about those strategies here when we move on to our next piece. Okay. when we were talking about this particular presentation, all of these things are true all year, every year, whether students are in school or they're in a remote learning, a distance learning environment. But there are some additional challenges for remote learning. So when you are in a classroom, classrooms themselves are set up to promote success for students. So everything from the actual physical organization of a classroom to the way that a teacher moves about the classroom, right? There's a strategy that they call management by proximity, right? Just the fact that a teacher might be walking around the room is something that is set up to ensure that students are on track, that they're working on their assignments, that they have easy access to the help that they need. There's somebody there to say, hey, let's get started on this. What do you need to get started on this? And when we talk about remote learning, it requires students to have a higher level of self-advocacy. They need to be able to kind of diagnose what they need to be more successful. And that's hard, especially if they haven't learned how to do that. So some of the challenges that we see in remote learning that I'm sure you have seen with your own students is student engagement. It can always be a challenge when you're learning a subject that's maybe not your favorite. It's hard to get into it, but it's particularly challenging when you don't have some of the better trappings of the classroom environment. Things that we use for school tools, tablets and computers, are also entertainment devices. It can be really difficult for students to resist the urge to click over to their game while they're playing or watch a YouTube video, right? It's really hard for them to avoid those distractions when they're using basically an entertainment device for what they're doing. And even when they're focused on their work, again, they're being bombarded by those alerts. And we see that recent studies have shown that student engagement is an issue from kindergarten through college. So it's not even associated with just one age level. Another thing, when you don't have that physical inbox, you don't get to watch everybody else walking up and turning in their assignment, it can provide even more additional challenges for students in turning in their work on time. And they can kind of skim through directions if they're doing work on their own in that asynchronous time. They may not be taking the time to really read through directions. They may not understand the directions. That can be difficult too. And sometimes they are there, they technically attended their meetings, but they weren't a part of their meetings. They have their microphones off, their cameras off. They're off in another world and they're not really getting what they could be getting from that remote setting. Okay. So before we talk a little bit about what we can do, I just want to see if there's anything in the chat here questions about the initial piece here before we start talking more about this. Oh yes. 8th graders are masters of anti-learning techniques. I like the anti-learning techniques is a great term for that. Yes. And students in general can be, right? We can all be our own worst enemy, but that is a piece. Any specific questions about that overview information before we truck along to what we might be able to do about it? Okay, go ahead and keep popping stuff in the chat there. Oh, please do not feel like an absolute failure regardless. That just kind of popped up and went away. But, it's an overused phrase at this time, but in a lot of ways it can't be said enough. The grace we all need to afford ourselves as we're all learning something new is enormous. And when we talk about something like executive function, one of the best things that we can do for our students is to help them to really discern what they need and ask for the specific help they need so that you don't need to supervise all the time. That's just something that you really it's not reasonable. You're not going to be able to do it. So please cut yourself that slack and don't hold yourself to that unreasonably unhealthy perfectionist standard. We're all really in this together here, and we do need to really give ourselves, cut ourselves some slack moving forward in that. Let's talk a little bit. Hopefully this will be a little more hopeful. Let's talk a little bit about what we might be able to do. What can parents and teachers alike do to help support this functioning? Okay, so let's look at this particular piece first. We are not born with executive function skills. Students who don't have executive function skills now, or your children who might be struggling, this is something that people need to learn. Everyone needs to learn. So don't assume whether if a child is, say, 13 years old, you can't just say, you know better the way to do this. As teachers, you really have to understand that if they don't, they don't, right? These skill sets need to be learned. You're not born with this information. And if you don't have a time, if you don't have the experience, the practice, you'll never develop these skills. So we need to really look first at the fact that we're not born with them, but things like creative play, games, schoolwork, right? We're practicing things like attention, integrating attention, working memory, self-control, problem solving, right? And we really expect that by high school, students will be able to do a lot of these things. And I want to again say that if we don't work on these skills, and if we're not cognizant of that, we can't just expect that these students will have them. So for both teachers and parents and other compassionate adults in students' lives, just really important that we're identifying those areas in which students might be struggling and helping them to find better strategies to move forward, okay? So let's talk about some more specific pieces of this. The first section of this has to do with perfectionism. I will share with you as a gifted education teacher in a middle school setting that I had a handful of students in my career that were literally paralyzed by their perfectionism. They were afraid to start working until they thought they had a perfect plan for what it would turn out to be. And the more they lost time and the more they couldn't come up with a perfect plan, the more frustrated they became. It can be really debilitating. And so looking at how we might be able to support both high expectations and eschew the notion of complete perfectionism can be really, really important, in particular for our gifted students. So this information comes from the NAGC. Again, these links are available here, but they have categorized different types of perfectionists with some very interesting titles here. But the first is that academic achiever. So the academic achiever is that student who might get an 89% on a spelling test and to deem themselves to be a failure if they're not getting that A+, right? If they don't do that well on one assignment, they get that sense of I'm not very smart just in general. Those types of students can really benefit from the supportive adults in their lives, de-emphasizing grades and external evaluations and focusing on growth and satisfaction from completing work before it happens. So instead of waiting until, especially if you know this to be the type of behavior that comes from your child, before they come to you with that 89, make sure that a lot of the conversations you're having with them involve the value of the work and the value of growth and learning, and not waiting until they bring you that grade that they're not happy with to say, oh, that's okay, grades aren't everything. There is also the aggravated accuracy assessor, which is, while it's great alliteration, it's kind of hard to say, but this is the person who focuses on their mistakes and might spend a huge amount of time trying to create perfect work. No matter the value of the assignment, it could be a 10-point assignment or a 1,000-point assignment. This is the person who might spend so much time on their homework that they're not sleeping or that they aren't participating fully in the rest of their life. And in order to help those students, some of the strategies you can work on are modeling mistakes, showing examples of imperfection. There are some excellent resources out there for showing famous failures, right? Folks that ultimately went on to be extremely successful, not necessarily despite their failures, but because of what they learned from their failures, right? One of those super basic examples is the fact that Michael Jordan didn't make his high school basketball team and is now arguably the most famous basketball player of all time. Some of those kinds of examples and things can be helpful for students. We're going to talk a little bit more about this, but sharing your own mistakes or challenges can be particularly helpful for students. It's very powerful because of the light in which students tend to see their respected and trusted adults. That next person might be that procrastinating perfectionist that I was just telling you about. That can be that student who may be so risk averse that they really just don't even get started, or they can't figure out how to start. And this is a student who can benefit tremendously from somebody to sit down with them and help them create appropriate timelines and even set some little goals, right? When you say, this is a quick write for your language arts class and it's worth 8 points, let's dedicate 20 minutes to this assignment, not 3 hours. That can be really helpful. Then we have that controlling image manager, and this is someone who focuses really heavily on the perception of others, and they really want to be seen as a high achiever. They really want to be seen as someone who is that sort of definition of success. This might even show up in outside of your schoolwork. This might be the kiddo who doesn't want to play a game that they're not good at and who might throw the game rather than be the loser. That someone for whom appearing to be competent, appearing to be good at something is extremely important. And here's where looking at things like sportsmanship and developing pride in that process and effort can be very important. If not everything's about winning, you can help the controlling image manager move along with more success. The last one is on our next slide here, and it kind of rolls into another piece, but this is the risk evader. The risk evader is someone who often chooses to disengage when they are faced with the possibility of not being successful. So some of these students have very big ideas and very big goals, but they're afraid to engage because they are afraid they won't be successful. So this might be someone who chooses not to take that advanced placement class because they think it might be too hard, or someone who doesn't want to answer the question unless they're sure they have the right answer. And this can lead with our gifted students to a real stymieing of their creativity. If they have great creative ideas, they need to really be aware that basically your ideas are experiments. So this is some of these strategies that go on to here. Every adult, every child has had something that they wanted to do or something that they are actually really good at, but they have a fear that maybe it's not going to go well. They panic a little bit about putting something out for the world to see. And if you can share, and we hope obviously that teachers will do this as well, but if you can share your own fear of biting off more than you can chew, your own idea of taking something that you're pretty proud of and putting it out into the world, not being sure how it's going to be received. Modeling your own fear is really powerful. It's really powerful for students need to know that adults have those same experiences with frustration and fear. Growth mindset is big here too. The I can't do it yet. And Carolyn Dweck is the master of the growth mindset. There's tons and tons of information out there about the growth mindset. But the idea of really encouraging that positive self-talk. Not I can't do it, but I can't do it yet. And then discuss the scaffolds, the steps that might need to be taken in order to encourage that success. View new ideas as experiments. If you look at something that a scientist does, experiments fail on a regular basis, but they're not really a failure because every time you fail in an experiment, you learn something about that process, you learn something about how to do it the next time. So those are some good strategies to work on perfectionism. I'm seeing things pop up here, Tom. Anything we need to chat about in the...
One asked about counselors who specialize in working with gifted students. So I just put Lori Kamali Kaplan's contact information there.
Okay.
And
yeah, Lori, yeah, she actually gave, and we can, another thing that we can do here is give you guys a link. Let's make a note to find the link. She did a training for our teachers earlier, and we were lucky enough to be able to record it about social emotional needs of the gifted in particular in this particular odd time. But we were able to record that session, and we'll share that link with you guys as well. So that's some other information there.
Yeah.
And
one was a parent that also experiences ADHD too, and have these same executive function issues.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really common. And I think even if you have some piece of it down pat, I think it's extremely common for people to struggle in one of these areas. And please let it be known that while we put together this presentation, we are in no way claiming that we don't suffer in our team from issues with some of these things as well, right? We're purveyors, passers along of this information, but by no means are we not saying that we agree. In fact, I actually was joking when we were putting together these slides. I said, you know, I relate a little too strongly to a lot of these lists and slides here. I think we're all works in progress, right? It's really been a big deal. And yes, working from home has been such a huge change. And I do think, again, that goes back to the idea of those challenges of remote learning being challenges for everyone. And actually, if Carol's going to click us to the next slide, that's a perfect segue. Thank you very much, whoever posted that. So we have this statement here that just says, remote learning makes failure more possible. But in all honesty, just having to shift the way that you live your life and do your job, it really highlights all those challenges for us, right? So we come into doing our jobs this year and thinking about it as an adult, we're having to relearn things, even something like the fact that Carol is clicking through slides. If I click through slides, I can't see the people on the screen, and I don't like that. Right? Just the technological pieces of it are huge challenges, but this is a really great opportunity for us to share those struggles with our students. So this piece here says the amazing and ironic thing is that remote makes failure more possible, more visible, and more universal. No matter how great you are at what you do, when somebody tips your job on its end and makes you do it in a brand new way with limited resources, in a different amount of time from a different location, you are going to hit some challenges and some roadblocks, and you're going to experience some failures. And there's a decent chance you're going to do it on a Zoom call or on a Google Meet, and it's going to be visible, and you're going to struggle that way. So we know that there are students for whom they're the people who were always on time, but now they have a technological issue that means they couldn't get logged in and they come in stressed, right? We know that's true for teachers too. We've all been trying to log into something and your computer restarts in the middle of it, and then you're late and you're panicking, right? People who usually are first to contribute are literally muted by the technology and by these different issues. But this little piece here says it's sort of a miracle, right? It makes it possible for students to see adults actually flounder and try to figure things out. If you'll hit that next slide, Carol, that goes along with this. So one of the top strategies for teaching in a classroom and for teaching things as a parent is to model. But we don't actually usually have an opportunity to legitimately model our struggles and our failures. If you are in a position to be teaching somebody else how to do something, it's usually because you already know how to do it. So we miss some of those awkward moments. But struggling is awkward, uncomfortable, disorienting, and universal. We all have those issues, and that means it would make sense for us to really show students how to manage the response to that for recovery. We can't say it's never going to happen. We have to be able to say, this is going to happen, and here, let's work through how we might figure out how to move forward. When we are in this type of a period, away from a school building, away from our jobs, human beings who are normally experts in their field are experiencing these different struggles and challenges in such a brand new way. And it is extremely visible. And we are able to say, we have to be able to show students that not everything goes right all of the time. And here's how we moved forward. It's a real life experience in showing how we deal with those stress responses. And even though it's kind of crummy, it's actually a surprisingly good opportunity to teach and a surprisingly good opportunity to let students know, when you are working with young people, it is extremely common for them to have the misconception that you just hit some certain age in which you know what to do and when you will stop, quote unquote, making mistakes. And we know that's not true, but we have very few authentic opportunities to really share those with students. And this is a time for us to really share, hey, this crazy thing happened when I was trying to do this thing for work today, and I got super flustered and very frustrated, and this is how it ultimately worked out. So for parents to share their own struggles, challenges, fears, failures, for the adults, the trusted adults in students' lives to share those experiences is an extremely powerful opportunity for students to learn that they're not alone, and that it's perfectly normal to experience those different emotions that are associated with those types of challenges. Okay. Next piece here, I think this goes into some more specific strategies. Thoughts or questions about those? And we're going to kind of move into a different piece. I saw some excellent, insightful comments popping up there. I can kind of read them, but then they go away.
Yeah.
Yes.
One person commented about being a college student and just the difficulty of focusing and just staying on top of lectures, and the strategy of recording the lectures and then coming home and transcribing the recordings word for word turned out to be a successful strategy. I'm sure though a lot of work, but with the insight that, how we cope and accommodate for our lack of executive function is a breakthrough, but realizing it is the first step. So
true, as with so many things, right? Realizing it is the first step. I see this other comment here too, that my sons were super surprised when I told them I struggled with my grades. Huge. I literally was just speaking actually to my sister the other day, and I said, our parents were great, but they really had me fooled into thinking that they just knew what to do about everything. And it turns out they were just pretty good at not sharing all the struggle. And while I have nothing to complain about with my parents, I do think there was a point in my life where I was older and I had to say, when will I get that magic adult ability? And then we had sort of a real conversation about the fact that you maybe are never going to be certain about everything you do. And that would have been helpful for me to know when I was younger, right? It is comes as a surprise. So I think that is huge when you have those conversations with either students or your own children or nieces or nephews. It really is it's crazy what they believe about adults and what adults can do and can't do and don't experience. So it's awesome to see so many of you expressing that here. Okay, so let's talk about some more. These are outside of the area of perfection, but if you recall, if within your working memory, if you recall that we talked about the fact at the beginning of this presentation that executive function relies on those 3 types of brain function. So those were working memory, mental or cognitive flexibility, and self-control, self-regulation. So a lot of these strategies, again, come from the Harvard University Center for the Developing Child. And that particular publication, actually has strategies from infancy through adolescence. And so I focused a lot of this on lumping in more of the school-aged group. But again, the links are in here if you have some interest in working with younger children, and there are some additional resources there as well. But when we talk about something other than perfection, there are some fun things that you can do to work with your children in terms of developing some of these other skill sets. So again, these are lumped together this is for ages 5 through 12. These would still be beneficial for older students, and simpler versions would be beneficial for younger students. But we kind of focused in on this particular age range. But when we look at things as simple as playing games, so we talk about practicing using games that require players to remember and track. So those can be as simple as Connection, Go Fish, Old Maid, Spades, and Hearts. And when you're playing those types of games, or your kiddos are playing those types of games, we're really working on our working memory, and you're promoting mental flexibility because you're planning, you're strategizing, and you have to be ready for what happens next. You can't plan your way through an entire game because other people are involved. Again, matching games, when we talk about attention and mental flexibility, again, some basic examples here. Games that require fast responses. We don't always in life have ample time to make some decisions. And so quick decision-making games like Snap or Slapjack or Spit, games that involve strategy are big. They provide an opportunity for you to make that plan and hold it in your mind. Again, working on mental flexibility and working on working memory. So again, this presentation is available to you, so don't feel like if you're looking for that list of games, again, this is all available to you guys to download and view at your leisure. Give me my next slide, please, Carol. So physical activities also have a lot of benefits in developing executive function skills. So here again, we have games that require quick responses. So this is practicing our attention and our inhibition, something like musical chairs, red light, green light, Mother May I. These are all different types of games that require you to be paying attention, to really focus, and to process that information quickly. Organized sports. They have actually quite a few benefits beyond the idea of coordination, but the fact that you have to actually hold a set of rules in your mind, manipulate a strategy, and not only focus on your own behavior, but focus on what's happening in the game. Again, you can't start off at one goal line and just plan your path through without considering what the other players are doing. Okay. And then there are also some additional games in there listed, but these have this can work with any type of organized sport. And then constant monitoring of the environment and fast reaction times. So here, something like hiding or tag, laser tag, paintball, right? Pay attention not just to what you are doing, but you have to pay attention to your surroundings and what's going around with you. The information here you will find also suggests that there can be some of these practice activities can fall under video games, but we all know that video games come with their own set of challenges, and video games need time limits, and you also need to know what your kiddos are getting into. I'm going to make a plug beyond this. Actually, this plug comes from the Harvard Center for the Developing Child, but I'm going to make a plug for Common Sense Media anyway. Common Sense Media is an excellent source to review not just video games, but books, movies, educational websites. They provide some really honest, as they say, nonpartisan views of these different pieces. As a middle school language arts teacher, one of the things that I found was that my students were often capable of reading books that were of a word level that they could read, but of a subject matter that might not have been appropriate for them. And a great place to go pop in a book title and find out if the subject matter is appropriate for different age levels is that Common Sense Media. So if you are looking to practice some of these skills or you are concerned with maybe some of the video game pieces of this, Common Sense Media is a great place to look at that. Okay, so beyond physical activities, music, singing, and dance. Other great opportunities for building executive function skills. So in terms of younger students, songs that repeat and singing in rounds. So for all those times that you got stuck in a never-ending chorus of row, row, row your boat, you were actually practicing your executive function skills and your working memory by doing that, right? You have to pay attention to your part and figure out where you come in, and you have to be able to keep those patterns up. Playing a musical instrument has been proven to be really successful in your selective attention and self-monitoring. There's physical skill, but it also challenges that working memory to make sure that you are playing along with that group. Music classes also follow those rhythmic patterns and exercise coordination of working memory, attention, cognitive flexibility, inhibition, and dancing. Again, some of those pieces, attention, self-monitoring, working memory. Dancers have to hold choreography in mind and coordinate movements, and those are all pieces that will support the development of these types of brain function. In addition to the fact that a lot of the things we're talking about are also extremely beneficial for social emotional development, right? And providing awesome opportunities for students to interact and build relationships. So there are some additional benefits here as well. Then there are also some quiet activities. We say quiet activities. Some of these might be done independently, and some of them certainly might be done with other people. But students who are practicing using brain teasers can be a huge opportunity for students to quietly practice. And aren't we all always looking for something quiet for people to do, right? Quietly practice things like brain teasers. And so some of those examples, and these would obviously be dependent upon the age of a child, but there are tons and tons and tons of websites out there and free resources even for these things like crosswords, word finds, mazes, number games like Sudoku, a Rubik's Cube, logic and reasoning games, guessing games, things like I Spy. Those are all quiet activities that students can work on by themselves or with others that they can be actually learning something and building that capacity, that executive function capacity at the same time. Okay, these are, I'm going to say these are listed as executive function activities for adolescents, but I will also say that a lot of these would be strategies to assist students really of any age with schoolwork. These are particularly, things we see a lot for adolescents, so maybe for ages 12 and up. But I truly believe a lot of these would be very helpful strategies for students younger than that as well. Okay, so when we talk about executive function for older students, one of the best places to start is the idea of goal setting, planning, and monitoring. So some of this may happen around a school assignment, but ways to practice with your kiddos might have nothing to do with a particular class in school. Talking to your kiddos about meaningful goals that they're interested in accomplishing can be the very best step to get started. If a goal is meaningful to a teen in particular and not established by adults, teachers, parents, grandparents, guardians, what have you, it can be much easier to practice all the steps needed to get somewhere. So helping students to identify a meaningful goal that they would like to accomplish is something that is just a conversation you can have to begin with. You don't have to set it up as, let's get together a plan to save the world, but talk about what's something meaningful that they would like to look at. And it can be something really small to begin with. So it could be that they want to plan a birthday party. Probably not now, right? But maybe they want to plan a birthday party. They're interested in getting a driver's license. They want to apply to college. They want to save money to buy a computer or a new phone, right? Something that matters to them. Then help them develop that plan to get there. What are the action steps you might take to get there? And planning for potential roadblocks. So even something as simple as that, planning a social event, right? I jokingly said, not now, but what if your child had been planning to host a small social event for a friend's birthday, and now they're in a position where they can't host that in person? This is a great learning opportunity to say, what can we do besides just reschedule for later? Planning something that you could take this party online. Can this be one of those drive-by birthday celebrations? What could we do to not have to give up on the plan we have? It is extremely important, just like we talked about before in terms of not having that fear of failure overall. It's really important for students to know that plans don't always go as instructed. And if they are prepared in advance to identify some of those potential roadblocks, they will fare better when they get there. If you have a conversation, and this is a big thing with our gifted education students, a lot of students who are gifted feel a really extreme sense of personal responsibility within the world. They have a heightened sense of injustice, and they take on what they hear in the news. And it is, for example, it's impossible for them to understand how people could be homeless, for example. And they get very caught up in what can be done about it. But obviously, it's going to be extremely difficult for one 14-year-old to completely absolve the problem of homelessness. And so if your child has an interest in something, in righting the wrongs of the world, I would highly recommend that you use some resources like DoSomething.org or Volunteer Match to identify some smaller steps, some concrete actions, some ways they can contribute to some of these larger changes without taking on the entire weight of the world on their own shoulders. I wouldn't say that you should discourage students from addressing some of these bigger problems, because at the end of the day, some crazy idea from one individual could be the difference in so many of these issues. So I wouldn't say to discourage them, but I believe they will get discouraged if they take on too large of an issue and they're unable to make the change they want to see. So helping them to identify smaller steps can be really helpful. And then monitoring your behavior in relation to your plan. So making a plan is not enough. Setting some sort of checkpoints to really say, how far along am I in my plan? Is this working? Do I need to change my actions? Has something outside changed, just like we talked about with that social event example? Something out in the outside world changed. What do we need to do in response, right? Those can be really helpful steps. Next piece, Carol. So that goes along with our self-monitoring. This is our a good place to encourage positive self-talk. Talking through the steps of a problem to understand kind of where you are. And here we go again with the recognizing that experience is a good thing, even if experience results from failure. Try to see where other people are coming from. This can be a big challenge sometimes, right? To step outside of ourselves and consider multiple perspectives, but kind of figure out where other people are coming from and how their own motivations need to be considered in moving forward. And helping them to be mindful of interruptions. This again, I laugh when I say that these are for kids, because I think we're all in this position. And again, the working from home thing, right? There are a lot of times that I would rather sit back and pet my dog than answer an email, right? So sometimes you really have to put yourself in check as well. And that's another great way to model for the kids in our lives, to be able to say, hey, I really wanted to kick back and watch the rest of my Netflix show, but I have work to do, and I'm pushing through that, right? And then self-reflection practices are really helpful for students to try to figure out why they feel the way that they feel, and also in terms of their planning. So when we talk about self-reflection practices, yes, there are all kinds of questionnaires and rubrics, and you can certainly talk to them. But even just asking your student or your child to really take a few minutes to jot down the way they feel about a project, a policy, a something or other, just as a piece for them to really think about how they feel about what they're working on. Some additional activities for teens. These really are pretty briefly described here because they work very much hand in hand with the other things we were talking about. Again, we had been talking there more about some specific project pieces, but there are certainly benefits for teens as well to sports and movement. We have that quick decision making and attention, mindfulness, stress reduction, which becomes even more important the more involved they are, music and theater. The strategy and logic comes in here. And again, the idea that some types of computer games can provide an activity for students. And you'll see here again that nod to Common Sense Media and the note that it is important to set time limits. And, hey, if you get pushback about setting time limits, you could always blame it on Harvard, because that's where this particular information came from, right? So you could pass that blame off onto someone else. The next facet of this is just a little bit of information about study skills. We talked at the very beginning about the fact that often our gifted learners struggle with study skills because they haven't struggled yet. And the older they get, it is super hard to struggle for the first time. If they've always been in a position for things to come easily, it is a panic attack waiting to happen when things are a struggle. So it's really important for us to acknowledge that and again, look at it as a skill that hasn't been developed yet. That's our growth mindset piece. It hasn't been developed yet. Okay, so helping students to break down a project into manageable pieces. And you'll see this larger note on here, excuse me, that says help students identify the scaffolds they need to be successful. As a teacher, and I'm positive as a parent, guardian, trusted adult in this group, we have all heard a student say, I don't know what to do. And that's why I didn't do the thing I was supposed to do. But I don't know what to do could be anything from I didn't know which website to log into. I can't find the directions to, I don't understand the terminology of this assignment to, I'm overwhelmed with the timeline piece. The best skill a student can have is to be able to look at a project, be it for school or otherwise, break it down into those manageable pieces and identify where they need assistance and who can provide that assistance. So if they are in a position to just say to a teacher, I need help, or to you, I need help, that is hard because it takes a lot of breaking down into, you don't know where the charger is for your laptop, or you don't know what the term photosynthesis means, or you aren't sure how to create a PowerPoint. So these are really important skills for kids to have. We say advocacy, self-advocacy is so important. And here's a piece that is often forgotten. The kind of help you need. Students should not be afraid to ask for the kind of help they need. And if they can identify that, it can make everything so much easier, so much less frustrating, and can really set them up for the kind of success they desire. So that comes along with some additional assistance in identifying reasonable plans. So again, are you going to rectify the problem of homelessness in the world by next Thursday? Probably not. Are you going to build a life-size robot that does the dishes by next week? Probably not. Although if you do, please send it to my house. But that being said, if you have a reasonable plan for your steps, you are in a much better place to to get started. So again, self-monitoring, reduce distractions, make sure that if somebody, for instance, if you are giving a presentation and somebody holds their very cute dog up on the screen, like just happened to me, and then you lose track, but you're very excited to see the dog, you have to figure out how to pull it back together, right? Reducing those distractions, keeping a calendar. If a teacher gives a student, or if you as a parent or a guardian give a student say 6 weeks to create a project and it has 12 pages of directions, how many students, how many of us personally might wait until 5.5 weeks have passed to get started? Chunking those projects into timelines and knowing, keeping an individual learning log. What work have I already done? Let me go look. Let me see where I am and honestly check in with myself to see where I need to be is huge. And then also reflecting after you complete those assignments. Hey, I waited until 5.5 weeks had passed and then I had to stay up for 48 straight hours. And all the trusted grownups in my house were very upset with me. And I lost my video games for a week, right? Or, you know what? It was so much easier when I just decided that I was going to work on this for a half an hour before I turned the ringer back on my phone, right? Just even reflecting on, not just reflecting on the grade you got, but reflecting on the process. How did the process work for you? Those can be really, really important pieces of these steps for study skills. Next piece here. Okay, so here's, I think we just have a couple more slides here, which is good because I'm just chit-chatting away. There are a couple more slides here that are some additional sort of fun activities that you can work on with kiddos. Next slide for me, Carol. Okay, flexible thinking activities. So, and there are some more of these linked here in this presentation, but here are some like quick, you know, we're talking about some big ticket items, right? But here are some quick things that you can do to really work on developing these skills with your kids that you can do all day, every day, fun for everybody, in 5 minutes, without a lot of additional supplies, okay? I think this is awesome to find out, right? That telling silly jokes and making puns is actually a flexible thinking activity. So when somebody gives you, like if you're one of those people like myself who likes to make a really silly groaner type joke, right? Or you like to share a pun and people go, oh, you can say, I am working on my flexible thinking for my executive function skills. And it really is huge. But all jokes aside, wordplay, silly jokes, making puns all require students, people in general, to understand multiple meanings of words. So when you look at it that way, it is really very clearly a good way to understand this. So if you talk about, if you're talking to students, just even talking about, say, a school of fish, if you don't understand that in that respect, we're not talking about a physical building, the jokes aren't funny, we don't understand what's going on with these fish, right? We have really simple roadblocks here when we don't understand multiple meanings of words. If students do not have flexible thinking, if they're very rigid in their thinking, they don't get those jokes either, right? So those are some ways we can work with wordplay, and books that play with words are huge too. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Amelia Bedelia series. That's one of the suggested pieces here. But that was a family favorite of mine. Amelia Bedelia is the most literal person in the world. And she goes to work for someone who gives her a list. And one of the things says, draw the curtains. And she literally gets out a piece of paper and draws a picture of the curtains. Huge, right? These are really important things for kids to be able to understand. Make up new rules for games. Now, granted, you have to agree on those rules so you don't have a fight later on, but take a game you already play and try something else with it. Play something like How Many Ways. This one in particular says, grab some different options and say, how many different ways can we make 10 with these groups of objects? Another thing you can do is pick up a random household item, the vegetable peeler or a hole punch, and ask a kid to tell you what it is, and they can say anything but the real answer. Have them come up with some creative new uses for things around the house. Those are all flexible thinking activities that can be really fun and simple and take 5 minutes and can become a nice habit to do with kids. I think we have some working memory boosters next here. Yes. Okay. So practice visualization. So encouraging kids to create pictures in their mind can really help them to put themselves in a situation. Younger students can just tell you what they see. And as they get older, they can write things down. They can describe an image. They can do something with what they have visualized, and they can use it. They can use it for something else. Music and theater. Again, here's another kind of a piece that goes along with that. Ask them to be the teacher, right? Ask them to teach you how to do something, and it will help them to share with you. They can role play. They can make an infomercial. They can do all kinds of different things, but teach you how to do something. Encourage active reading. That's another piece for working memory, so that it doesn't just go away immediately. And not all of these strategies work as well. They're not the preferred strategy for everyone, but jotting notes, highlighting, talking out loud, asking questions as the parents or the trusted adults in these kiddos' lives. Ask them to talk to you about what they're reading, and not just to recount it to you in a summary, but talking to them about the themes, the main character, who they relate to, what it reminds them of. Helping them to make those connections can be really helpful. And also making it multi-sensory. So when we talk about working memory, doing things like writing it down and saying it out loud, and walking through the house and pointing at things, right? Physically showing these strategies. If it comes to them in multiple ways, it can help it stay there long enough for them to make sense of what they're working on. I think I know that's going to be extremely disappointing to you guys, but I think that's the end of my particular droning. But there are 2 pages here. Some of these are sources that we have linked to in the previous slides, but there are also just on, oh, I already have that link in there. If you will go back to page 2, Carol, some of these are links that we haven't actually really talked about. They're just more links for both additional strategies, for additional information about executive function, for additional information about gifted learners in particular and some of their struggles and self-regulation.